Okay, so we looked at, and it ended with science, the impact of new scientific theories such as Freud, Darwin. Before that, we talked about social theories such as Marx, and this beginning of questioning all that we know. And one of the big things that they're going to start to question, well, that's the church as science becomes the new religion. And so we're going to start to see responses to all of these changes. Begin with kind of some Catholic challenges or changes in the modern world. And so what had really caused these challenges for the Catholic Church is that nationalism in some countries is actually going to decrease the influence of the Catholic Church because it divides loyalties. It is going to, the king is going to say, like, I don't want you to be more loyal to the Pope or to your church than you are to me. They're going to want you to be more loyal to the nation. So on this note, such places as Bismarck in Germany is going to attack the Catholic Church in what is called a Kulturkampf crusade. You might be familiar with the word Kampf from Hitler's Mein Kampf, which means struggle. And so this literally translates to mean cultural struggle. And so Germany wanted nationalism, and they knew that getting nationalism would weaken the church. Now, we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit because Germany won't become a nation until 1870, but this is what the nationalistic feelings in Germany at this time are. And so this nation building, what's going to make Germany a nation, is going to lead them to try to weaken the church. This is also happening in Italy, and they are reacting to the competition that they're having for people's loyalties to the church. They want them to be more loyal to the state or nation. Also, the rise of liberalism is a challenge to the church in the 19th century. It seemed to further distance the papacy from society. And so the syllabus of errors and I think the full title is The Syllabus of Errors on the Scourge of Liberalism, is issued by Pope Pius IX in 1864, and he will condemn liberalism and Italian unification. And it will later specify, acts against that. The First Vatican Council in 1870 is going to proclaim the doctrine of papal infallibility. And what this means then is it declares, trying to strengthen the church's hold over, some of the populace, that the Pope is infallible. Like, we have an answer too. Like, liberalism might say it has an answer, nationalism might say it has an answer, and science might say it has an answer, but we have an answer too. The Pope is infallible when it comes to certain cases, especially about religion, that he is always right and is always speaking divine revealed truth on religious matter. This is part of the church's answer. And so the increased popularity of rationalism and science is also our third threat to the church and will cause alarm within the church. Namely, the rise of Darwinism further challenged traditional Christianity as science increasingly seemed to answer many of life mysteries. And what do people want? Like, is it easier to accept something that gives you an answer right there, or something you're going to have to lean on faith a little bit more? And so, this religion of science is starting to become very appealing. And so next we have the Rerum and Novarum of 1891, where Pope Leo XIII sought to permit Catholics to participate in politics of liberal state, to permit Catholics to participate in the politics of liberal states. He condemned socialism and Marxism while he defended private property or capitalism. Yet he stated that workers should have a living wage. This is called social justice, and that capitalists should do more to provide for the welfare of their employees. So definitely not Marxist or socialist, but still saying that there should be social justice, that the people should have what they need. He supported laws that protected workers from exploitation. He believed that employers should be treated well, and his pronouncement will lead to the creation of Catholic parties, like actual Catholic parties in the government and trade unions at the turn of the century, especially in Germany, Italy, and England. And they are going to be, their main concern is justice and all these things that we just mentioned here. Another thing, a reaction or a challenge to the church at this time, is there's a decline in church attendance, mainly in our working classes and skilled workers. Upper and middle classes and the peasantry are going to remain our primary classes within, but this decline is also going to hurt the church here. And increasingly, men will become less likely to attend church than women. And I think if you kind of follow these, that those trends kind of last today from this time period, that the working class and skilled workers, lesser and maybe more the middle class and peasantry that attend, and more women than men. I don't have the quite numbers on that, but that would seem like a trend that has continued. All right, so challenges to the church covered, challenges to the church and their reactions to this new religion of science and to liberalism and nationalism and rationalism. And so another reaction to rationalism is going to be realism. And so the rest of all of this is books and art, so it's going to go pretty quick here. So realism, romanticism is not reality, is what these people are going to say. Like, oh, those romantics, they are not portraying true life. And so these realists are going to start to swing towards reality. And realism is the belief that literature and art should depict life as it really was, not some romanticized ideal about like what dragons and chivalry looked like in the Middle Ages, but what life was really like. And it's largely a reaction to those failed revolutions we saw of 1848 and 49 and the subsequent loss of idealism as we move a little bit more towards some pessimism, especially after World War I and everyone starts killing everybody. So we see like a change, a shift here, that it's going to be more about the real and not just the dreamed here. In realism in literature, we're going to start talking about Honoré de Balzac, 1799 to 1850. He is French. The French are going to see the development of the realist movement. Remember, they're usually leading us in the arts. And he's going to give us his work, The Human Comedy, and other short novels, and it depicts urban society or cities as grasping, amoral, and brutal, characterized by Darwinism, struggle for power and wealth within the city, so survival of the fittest through the struggle of power, or to have power in the city. And his books really just show us what life was really like, okay, the struggle that was within this urbanization. Next is Gustave Flaubert, who's also French, and he gives us the work Madame Bovary, and he portrays the provincial middle class as petty, smug, and hypocritical. So he is criticizing the bourgeoisie. And his book, Emma Bovary, is like a bourgeoisie wife who is out having all of these adulterous affairs and spending all kinds of money to escape, the bourgeoisie like mask that she's having to wear. And so he's really just stating that underneath it, the bourgeoisie are not so nice. Next, we have Emile Zola, and he is going to give us Germinal. He is a giant of realist literature. He portrayed a seamy, animalistic view of working class life. I mean, you can kind of see that, like the animalistic taking away that control that humans have of working class life. And this work, 1885 Germinal, depicts the hard life of young miners in northern France. And so those are French writers. And then in England, we're going to get did I skip one? George Eliot, who is actually, I skipped a slide here, but I can just talk about it, who's not really a man, but really a woman, Mary Ann Evans, 1819 to 1880. And she's going to examine the ways in which people are shaped by their social classes, as well as their own inner strivings, conflicts, and moral choices. And so she's going to also speak about, if you're the bourgeoisie, this is what you do, how it shapes you, things like that. So then next is Thomas Hardy, 1840 to 1928, and he gives us Tess of the d'Iberville. He portrays a woman who was ostracized for having premarital sex, and so kind of that contradiction of those Victorian values here, and so kind of analyzing the realism of society and what that double standard. Next we get Leo Tolstoy. And he is the greatest Russian realist. Sorry for the announcements there. The greatest Russian realist. He has a fatalistic view of history, but he also believes that life can be decent while you're here. If you if you have love and trust and everyday family ties and enduring values, the life you have while you're here can be good, although he has a very fatalistic view. He gives us the work War and Peace, and it's his masterpiece, the story of the Russian society during the Napoleonic Wars. Many of you have probably read this. So next we get to a Scandinavian, and I just love his hairstyle here. Henrik Ibsen is the father of modern drama, and his plays examine the conditions of life and issues of morality, often at odds with the Victorian views of the day, of how at odds with, he's going to say the Victorian values are at odds, very much so, with how people actually are. And I really love his quote here, never wear your best trousers when you go out to fight for freedom and truth. That just seems, pertinent to some of the issues we've been talking about. So, realism and art. Moving out of literature into the art, realism. The most important artists of the 19th century and 20th centuries created art for art's sake. They didn't create art because a patron told them to create the specific item. They didn't create art because a church had asked them to do something religious. For art's sake, they are now going out and selling their art to the public. So this is kind of like art for the masses. They're going to paint what people want because they're dependent on people buying it to make their money. France again is going to dominate our realist art, and they sought to portray life as it really was, not as it was idealized, just like our writers. And ordinary people became the subject of numerous paintings. So our first that we're going to talk about is Gustave Courbet, of course Frenchman, we're starting again with France, and he coined the term realism. This is his, self-portrait here, like kind of an odd self-portrait, but whatever. And he gives us his work here, The Stonebreakers. And so he is going to show, like the realization of how tough life is. Like, this is your job. You're out working all day. You're breaking stone. Then we have Francois Millet, another Frenchman. Here's his self-portrait. And then he gives us the work, The Gleaners, which depicts farm women gleaning the fields after the harvest. And so he's like, hey, here it is. Here's what people are doing every day. Here's the reality of it. Then we got Honore Daumier, who gives us his work, The Third Class Carriage. I didn't have a self-portrait of him, but here's a picture. And here's his artwork, The Third Class Carriage. You have a grandmother, her child, and then grandchild on a railroad. So it's showing our new technology or transportation of the railroad. And it's a good example of how the railroad impacted the lives of the peasants, making it possible for them to move or travel to cities. Also, you're going to see that we have kind of some mixed classes in here, the guys in the top hats, but that everyone would be traveling into the city. Next, we have Edgar Degas, one of my favorite artists from this time period. He is also French. Here's his self-portrait. And he is going to give us Laundry Girls Ironing. And so this depicts ordinary women performing unskilled labor, our domestic servants. I'm not really sure if this is a water bottle that they're using for the ironing or she is drinking, but they are tired. This is everyday work, unskilled labor. So Degas also being a realist here. Next we get Edouard Manet, and he is going to, here's a portrait of him, not a self-painting again, but he is a French realist and impressionist painter who bridged both movements. So he is going to kind of, impressionism, as you can guess, is going to be our next topic of art at this time period. We're going to jump a little bit ahead in art. Who bridged both movements. He is considered the first modernist painter. You might want to highlight that there. And he gives us this work, like Déjeuner sur l'herbe, I think, which means like the picnic in the garden or the break in the garden. And it shocked audiences, like the salon audiences that it says in your note earlier, that ironically many of the great realist works were rejected by the salon. For this one definitely offended them. It has a female nude and two male clothed companions in an everyday park setting. I mean, I want to know how real this really is. I mean, then there's this random lady back here. Did the girls decide after eating lunch they wanted to take a bath? I don't know. I don't know how realist this is, but 1863. His other work, so a lot of nudes. Olympia, 1863, was equally revolting to the salon for its casual nude portrayal of a prostitute. So, very much, but I mean, there's I guess this is more of a realistic scene, the prostitute in her bed, nude. So, moving on, that leads us into Impressionism, our next art topic. Characteristics of Impressionism, again, it begins in France. So pretty much at this time period, if you got a question on the AP exam and it asked you where an art movement started, pick France. This is art up to the mid-20th century. Although we're not there with the history part yet, it's going to be helpful to kind of go ahead and show you the movement with Manet from realism into Impressionism. It's going to have an impact of photography. Now that cameras could accurately capture subject, artists can moved away from trying to perfectly capture an image. I mean, their work is being done by a camera, so why try to perfectly capture it? You're going to go the opposite direction. It's a reaction to that. Painters sought to capture that moment, that overall feeling when you close your eyes and you open them and you first see the light, and they're going to try to capture that light falling on real life scene before their eyes. A lot of outdoor painting, moving out into the countryside, using that natural light, using that first moment. So our first artist here is going to be Claude Monet. So not Monet. So it takes Monet, takes us into Monet. He's the foremost Impressionist painter. Here's a photograph of him, and then here's one of his works, Impression Sunrise. So not how a sunrise would exactly look, but the impression, like right as you open your eyes, right in the mood of the sunrise here. He's perhaps most known for his series paintings of the countryside at Giverny, aka the Water Lily series, and there's a ton of these, and he's probably most famous for these works of art. And La Promenade is one that I've seen on the cover of books. I've seen it all over the place, one that's very popular as well. Also the Rouen Cathedral, and so you can see that, this is kind of like that you've opened your eyes for a second, and it's like you captured that moment before everything registered, is how I like to think of Impressionism, the impression you got in the moment. Next is Pierre Auguste Renoir. In addition to landscapes, he is also going to paint subjects in candid poses and nude figures, so some more nudes, beware. This is La Bal au Moulin de la Galette, and of course La Bal dancing, and so they have like this party that they're at, and there's dancing and people are conversating, but these are candid poses, like people aren't stopping to pose. He's painting them, in action. Next, we have The Bather Arranges Her Hair is the title of this one. So again, the nudes, lots but candid pose. Like she's not posing for him, or if she is, it's looking like not. But in the moment of doing her hair after the bath. And then we have Camille Pissarro, who is considered by some to be the true father of Impressionism. And here are two of his self-portraits, old and young. He gives this garden at Pontoise, and so you can see, not quite defined everything, just that first capture that you have in that moment of opening your eyes. Next, we get Berthe Morisot, and she is considered, and one of the only women painters we're going to talk about in this time period, one of the greatest female artists of the late 19th century, and she focused on scenes of domestic life and portraits of friends and family, and so domestic life, friends and family. And Impressionism is now going to give way to Post-Impressionism late in the 19th century. So Post-Impressionism is now the desire to know and depict worlds other than the visible world of fact, and so this is going to go even from like that flighting moment of, hey, cameras are already catching everything. It's going to go to that, and then it went to the moment of like right when your eyes open. This is going what's inside your head, the unseen inner worlds of emotion and imagination inside your head, kind of hearkening back to the early 19th century romantics. Sought to express a complicated psychological view, so thinking like Freud at this time. It's going to give us Cubanism, which concentrated on zigzagging lines and overlapping planes. And it focused on mood, not objects, and fascinated with form as opposed to light, like Impressionism. So our major post-impressionist artist, first we have to start with the man right here, Vincent van Gogh. He's a Dutch expressionist, so we finally get to talk about the Dutch. In Starry Night, he painted the vision of night as he imagined it, not as it really was. Okay? It's in the right to your notes. As he imagined it, not as it really was. This is like if you popped open his brain, what he sees when you talk about a starry night. One of his most famous portrait shows him with a bandage on his ear after he allegedly cut it off. Self-portrait with a bandaged ear, and allegedly gave it in a gift box to a prostitute who he was in love with. I love this meme. Your love's got me looking so crazy right now. But anyway, so Van Gogh, probably one of the most famous post-impressionist artists. Next we have Paul Gauguin, and this is his self-portrait here, and he is going to give pioneer expressionist techniques. He saw form and design of a painting as important in themselves, and he'll become famous for his paintings of the South Pacific, where he spent some time, such as this one here, Where Do We Come From? So, from the South Pacific. Next, we have Paul Cézanne, and he is particularly committed to form and order design, as you can tell. Like, I set this all up and I'm going to paint it. Form and order design. His later works, however, will become increasingly abstract and non-representational. He also moved away from the traditional 3D-dimensional perspective toward the two-dimensional plane. And so you can see that here, moving kind of back to where we started with the two-dimensional. So it's like, oh, cameras can capture all this 3D. I'm going to move the other way. So everything's always a reaction. Next, we have Henri Matisse, who's the most important French artist of the 20th century. Expressionism of a group of painters led by Matisse was so extreme that an exhibition of their work in Paris prompted shocked critics to call Les Fauves the wild beasts, and particularly to paintings like this. Like, what is going on? This is La Bure de Vie, is this piece of work, and definitely upset the people at the exhibition. Matisse and his followers painted real objects, but their primary concern was the arrangement of color, like unnatural colors, the arrangement of color, line and form as an end in itself. Because they're different here. And here's a portrait he did of his wife, Madame Matisse. Next, we have Pablo Picasso, another name that should jump out to you. He is Spanish, so here's our Spanish artist. He's the most important artist of the 20th century. He founded Cubism in 1907 and Post-Impressionism, and he is going to give us the work. I guess I could go back here and talk about this real quick. Of course, here is an actual picture, and here's a self-portrait. He's going to give us Les Mademoiselles d'Avignon, and in 1907 is considered the first Cubist masterpiece. You can see, like, the zigzag lines, first Cubist masterpiece. Cubism, also known as an analytical cubism, concentrates on a complex geometry of zigzagging lines and sharply angled overlapping planes, just like the coordinates, so zigzag. I mean, I think you just have to have a certain mindset to like these kind of, it's very, geometry. Like, maybe geometry teachers, do they really like cubism? I don't know. I have to ask. Picasso also worked with Georges Braque in developing analytical cubism, and that's such as paintings such as Braque's violin and candlestick. Like, I think I make out a candlestick, and it's like they're the violin. Yeah, so, cubism. Next is Expressionism, and this is my favorite, I think, just because I've always had some Wassily Kandinskys in my house, namely this piece of art right here. I think maybe it's because it always matches everywhere you go or move. I don't know, but that's a side note. Anyway, in 1910, came the ultimate stage in the development of the abstract non-representational art, and that is by Russian painter Wassily Kandinsky. He is going to turn away from nature completely with his non-figural paintings, and he's going to use colors to express emotion and symbolism, but not any recognizable form. Like, I think that's what I like about it too, is you could stare at it forever and see something different every day, and it's because it's like the ultimate form of non-representational art. It's the abstract, it's the moment, it's the feeling. And so that is all I have for you today. I told you it would go pretty quickly here with some art. You can go back and look at these or do some research on your own. And, what do you think? I mean, do you have a favorite from where we started with Renaissance art, Baroque, Neoclassicism, Romanticism, Realism, Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Expressionism, Cubism? What's your thing? And so that's your video for this weekend. Don't forget your Words of the Week quiz. And next time I see you will be a work day.